So Genesis 29, starting at verse 1. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where do you come from?" They said, "We are from Haran." He said to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" They said, "We know him." He said to them, "Is it well with him?" They said, "It is well, and see, Rachel his daughter is coming with the sheep." He said, "Behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go pasture them." But they said, "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep." While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now, as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, "Surely you are bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him for a month.
Thanks, Sophie. We're going to carry straight on, so keep going from verse 15. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should ye therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel. And he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel." Laban said, "It's better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel. And they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is this that you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban said, "It's not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also, in return for serving me another 7 years." Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. So Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. Okay, big helps me if you keep that open, and there's some headings on the inside of the sheet that will be a help as well. I wanted to begin with this question as we begin, which is this: what difference does it make to have the Lord with us? It's probably something we've already been thinking about in this service already. What an inspiring testimony we've just been listening to. What difference does it make? You may know about the hashtag blessed phenomenon. That's if you're a fan of social media, there's this thing going on where people, including celebrities, they take photos of their college acceptance letter, or they take a picture like this of, their picture perfect family on holiday in front of a perfect sunset, and it has #blessed next to it. And of course, there's something good about that. We should acknowledge where gifts come from. These are blessings and they're from God. But overall, this #blessed phenomenon, it promotes or it plays into a certain view of what a life blessed by God really looks like. It has to look like this, basically. And this view gets reflected in churches as well. Often churches, they encourage Christian testimonies. You can tell your story. And it's allowed to have a little bit of darkness, a little bit of sin in it. But it must end on a happy note with how God fixed it all. And there's some neat lesson that you learned through it. And now everything is picture perfect once again. And can I say, if you have been in one of these sorts of quick fix church cultures, they can serve to encourage a sort of fake, shiny type of Christian life. And we all end up actually having to wear our masks to cover up what's really going on behind them. And each of us feels that we're the only one with any real problems or real sins or real struggles because of the culture. Now, thankfully, if you're a Bible reader, you will know the Bible is not like that at all. And we're restarting this series in Genesis. And in Genesis in particular, we see warts and all. We see real believers with real mess in their lives, real sins, real struggles. And also we discover in Genesis that there's often deeply entrenched intergenerational sins. That's one of the great things as we see generation by generation and how the story continues and unfolds. Really deep entrenched problems. But we also see in Genesis how God works out his wonderful purposes of blessing and salvation in the midst of all the human mess. So we're back to this series after a little gap, so I'm going to give a little recap. And it's we're in the Jacob section of Genesis. Jacob is the younger of two twins, born to these parents, Isaac and Rebekah. Jacob is the chosen one. He's the one, even before he was born, he was told that God's blessing will come through him to the world. But we are discovering that he's not proving to be a very nice or trustworthy person. And you'll remember what happened. He deceived or he manipulated his brother Esau out of his birthright, and he traded it for a bowl of stew. And then just straight after that, he tricked his father Isaac out of the blessing. He pretended to be the older brother Esau. And since then, he's been on the run. His brother wants to kill him. Things have turned out, it's not, a blissful family life at all. And he got sent away from the promised land to a place called Haran. And he's been sent away to find a non-Canaanite wife. And when he just started his journey, and this was last time if you were with us, we considered that episode where God appeared to Jacob in a dream, and he showed him a stairway between heaven and earth. This was chapter 28. And at that occasion, the Lord said to him these words, "Behold, I am with you, Jacob, and I will keep you wherever you go." And so the question hanging over our passage, chapter 29, is this. Okay, God has said he's with him. So what? What difference does it really make to have the Lord with us and in our lives? Is it going to make any difference? What will it mean to be #blessed by the Lord for Jacob? And the answers we're going to see, we're going to look at two answers from this passage, and they are these. The Lord does guide our path, but it may be into hardship. And number two, we still may reap what we sow, but it's the Lord's fatherly disciplines. That's where we're headed, and we're going to begin with the first one. The Lord does guide our path, but it may be into hardship. And our passage begins, verse 1, by saying, look with me, then Jacob went on his journey. So he's just had this stairway episode, and he's going on to Haran, and he came to the land of the people of the east. Now, it's probably a 2.5-week journey. He doesn't have a sat-nav. He's on his own. It's very dangerous. And then he must be very delighted when he spots at last a well. And here is somewhere he can fill up. He can stop for a drink. Only remarkably, as he gets talking to these shepherds at the well, he discovers that the Lord has led him to the exact place that he was seeking. In verse 4, Haran. Bingo, he's here, and he's tracked down the exact people that he's been trying to find. Verse 5, the household of Laban. And then of all things, verse 9, while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep. So he actually bumps into a member of the exact family he's looking for, and it's even the youngest, and we discover a little bit later on, the most beautiful daughter of that family. So for this guy who's looking for a bride, it all points to the Lord's wonderful guidance and providence. So having the Lord with us surely means the Lord does guide our path, and we're seeing that in these verses. Now, before we go on, it's worth just being aware, this is an ancient meet cute. You're familiar with meet cutes. If you're a fan of rom-coms, you'll be familiar with this. This one's Hitch. But a meet cute is where the hero and heroine meet, but they don't just meet, they have a meet cute. And they have a humorous, unusual, usually comic scenario. They bump into each other, one of them drops something, and then the other one picks it up, and their eyes meet. And if you're used to this genre, you know what that means. You know that by the end of the film, the two of them are going to be living happily ever after. It's a clue, it's a genre clue of where we're headed. Or another one, they're in a department store, one's looking for pajama bottoms, one for pajamas tops, and they decide they'll get them as a pair and buy them together. And okay, I've got it. These are the guys who are going to end up together. And there you go. And if you come across it, it's helpful. It's reassuring. You know where the plot is headed. You know that what's going to happen before the end of the film. And there's a similar thing in the Bible. But the clue that you were in a meet cute in the Bible, does anyone know what it is? How do you know you're in a meet cute? Does anyone know this? Yeah? Well, exactly. Thank you. Lionel knows. The meet cutes in the Bible always by a well. We've already had one in chapter 24. Rebecca and Abraham's servant. There's another one a bit later on with Moses. Where does he meet Zipporah? Classically, it's always by a well. And so we've got to tune into this. We know what's happening even before it happens. And this context actually helps us with our sense of anticipation and excitement and positivity. So we know Jacob has had this murky past behind him, but here the Lord is guiding him. He's at a well. He meets a woman. And this woman is going to be the love of his life. We know that, but we know what the clue means. But although clearly the Lord is at work in Jacob's life, he has guided his path. After the excitement of these first 14 verses, we get to the second half of the passage, and then the dark clouds start to gather. Because what we see is that Jacob's about to enter a period of terrible hardship. And the word which dominates from this point onwards in Jacob's life is the word serve or service. And it comes up just 6 times in this scene alone. So verse 15, and then verse 18, and then verse 20, and then 25, and then 27, and then 30. It's serve, serve, service, serve, serve. Jacob is entering the household of a man, this guy Laban, who is going to exploit him. He's going to make him serve him. And so Jacob is entering nearly 2 decades, a dark night of near slavery. And it's actually, we're going to see more of this as the story continues. It's foreshadowing Israel's slavery in Egypt in years to come. And Laban is going to play the part of the mini Pharaoh, the guy who enslaves and exploits God's people. More of that later. And so as we try and grapple with this question, what difference does it make to have the Lord with us? He promised to be with Jacob in chapter 28. The first answer to that question is, yes, the Lord does guide our path, but it may very well be into hardship, as Jacob is about to discover. And the first take home, I think, for us is an obvious one, but we need to reckon with it. We need to work out what the #blessed life really is. Some of Jacob's hardship is going to be related to his own mistakes. We're going to be thinking more about that in the second point. But actually, as we keep going on in Genesis, we're going to see that these two things, hard times and sin, are not necessarily linked at all. In fact, Genesis encourages us to uncouple them. Take, for example, Jacob's son Joseph, classic example. We keep getting told that the Lord is with him. The Lord is with him. And actually, for Joseph, that's going to mean being hated, persecuted, getting sold into slavery, getting wrongfully accused of sexual assault, getting imprisoned. And yet, throughout that whole period in Joseph's life, we keep hearing the Lord is with him. The Lord is with him. And so the book of Genesis is trying to hammer home to us that the hashtag blessed life is very often the life that is filled with real difficulty and hardship. And we need to reckon with that. This really shouldn't be a surprise to us if we're Bible readers. In fact, the most famous Psalm 23, is all about this topic. So the one that goes, "The Lord is my shepherd." And you think, wouldn't it be amazing if, the creator of all, the Lord of everything was my shepherd. He was the one guiding me through life. What could be better than that? And then we read on, where is this shepherd going to lead us? And we get to this line, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." And we're thinking, what? The valley of where? Who was in charge of the route planning? Who was the shepherd? And the answer is, it was the Lord. He chose the route. And this is exactly where he takes us. And it's an obvious point, but if God is going to be with us in 2025, we need to be aware it's not always going to be college acceptance letters and perfect sunsets. It's really not. In fact, it may very often be a shepherd leading us into desperate pain, or leading us into confusion, or leading us through grief. And yet, wonderfully, we don't have to conclude when those things happen that God has turned against us or he's abandoned us, something's gone terribly wrong. No, as the Lord promised Jacob in chapter 28, no, the Lord is with us. He's with us in the valley. And that means we continue to trust him. We can continue to follow his leading, even in the midst of the dark. And all that brings us on to the next part of the answer that this passage is giving us. Do you remember the question? What difference does it make to have the Lord with us? And I think we've seen first, well, the Lord does guide our path. He's in charge of it, but it may very well be into hardship. Point 2 is this. We may still reap what we sow, but it's the Lord's fatherly discipline. And as we read on in this chapter, we read about a terrible trick that gets played on Jacob. In verse 16, we discover that Rachel has an older sister. She's called Leah. And then in verse 18, it says, Jacob loved Rachel. And he said to Laban, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel. Then in verse 20, it says this. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. It's not just a long wait, but it's a lot of hard toil. But wonderfully, Jacob is fully on board with it. He's in love. He can't wait to be married, and the time passes very quickly. And then at long last, the wedding day comes around, and they have this feast, verse 22. But then, verse 23, in the evening, Laban took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. And I guess, we cruise over some of the details, but for this daughter swapping scheme to work, we have to make a couple of assumptions probably. The first is that I'm assuming that Leah would have been wearing a veil. It's hard to identify someone behind a veil. And then secondly, I'm assuming, or lots of commentators assume, that Jacob was probably a little bit tipsy, shall we say, from the feast. But, of course, when the morning comes around, he had never been more sober. Verse 25, in the morning, it was Leah. And I want us to think about what has just happened. What kind of a man must this guy Laban have been to do this to his daughters, to Leah and to Rachel? Just to try and get a few more years of labor out of this guy Jacob. These women, these daughters, they're not consulted. They get treated as objects. And predictably, their relationship with their father never recovers from this incident. We're going to see this, but in chapter 31, they are very glad to see the back of Laban. And then think of the damage that Laban does to the relationship between these two sisters. And we're going to see this as well in the coming chapters. From this point, they are now both locked into a bitter and unending rivalry. Just think what that would be like. But for Laban, everything comes down to hard economic realities. He's all about the money. And he's prepared to manipulate even his own family just to try and get a little bit more work out of one of the workers as he negotiates another 7 years out of Jacob in verse 27 in return for permission to marry Rachel. But the narrator clearly wants us to focus on how Laban's trick impacts Jacob in particular. And think of this, what a terrible trick to get played on Jacob, especially after all these years, 7 years of loyal service. And understandably, Jacob is furious. Verse 23, Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban said, "It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn." And the language here, if we're readers of Genesis, is dripping with irony. In fact, nearly every phrase he says. We've seen earlier in chapter 27, Jacob deceived his father, remember? Now he is the one being deceived here in verse 25. Earlier in chapter 25, Jacob was the one who played a trick where, do you remember, 2 brothers got swapped over? There was the firstborn and the younger brother. They got swapped. And now a trick is being played on him. And what's happening? 2 sisters are being swapped over, a firstborn and a younger one. Earlier in this tale, in this narrative, Jacob exploited his father's failing sight. Do you remember that? Isaac couldn't see very well, and he was feeling for his son's hairy arms. Now, Jacob's exploited by a trick in the darkness of night and behind a veil, where now the wool is being pulled over his eyes. Do you see, at every level, it's just we can't get away from how ironic this moment is. Jacob, whose name sounds like the word for cheat, is now being Jacobed. He's being cheated. And the writer is rubbing our nose in the fact that Jacob is now, at last, getting a taste of his own medicine. And part of the point of this episode is to underline, as readers of this, that in God's universe, actions have consequences. Paul says this, and we've already had it in our congregational reading, didn't we? Do not be deceived, Galatians 6. God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that will he also reap. And I think that verse is a good summary of what is happening in this whole sister swapping episode. Jacob sowed deceit and trickery in his life, and now he's getting a taste of it himself. He's reaping deceit and trickery. And I think we should pause and notice a few things about this agricultural metaphor. It actually comes up a few times in the Bible, this sowing and reaping metaphor. And the first thing that's kind of obvious about it is that it's not immediate, is it? But it is inevitable. We think there was no real benefit for me in acting with integrity in that situation. Being honest actually cost me professionally. Or there's no real disadvantage to taking the moral shortcut. Being selfish always seems to pay off for certain people. But even though the seeds take time to germinate, doesn't happen overnight, the point of the metaphor is that the seeds will produce an inevitable harvest at the end. That's the point here. Don't be deceived. There's no getting around the fact, you don't have to be much of a gardener. If you sow tomato seeds, Doesn't matter how much you will barley to come up in the spring, it's not going to be barley, it's going to be tomatoes. There's an inevitability about the consequence. Even if it takes time before you see it, it will happen. And the verse also teaches that it's both organic and natural, and that the Lord is behind it. Let me explain what I mean. It's organic in that God has set up the universe in a certain way so that there are natural consequences to actions. If you're going to sow corn on the cob, there's a natural outcome to what kind of a harvest you're going to get. If you eat only fatty foods, there's a natural outcome that will happen to your health. If you sow dishonesty in your relationships, there's a natural outcome of loneliness that will result. If you sow envy and jealousy in your life, well, there's a natural outcome of discontent and bitterness. I mean, this is what the book of Proverbs in the Bible is all about. Let me tell you, sow this and you'll reap this. And yet it's not just organic and natural. Actually, it's also personal. God is personally behind it. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Do you notice that? In terms of the Jacob story, the obvious cause and effect that is happening, in this episode, the deceiver getting deceived, it's here to identify or to alert us to the fact that God is at work. God is the one behind all of this. And God has made it super, super obvious in this situation so that we cannot miss it when we're reading through. And actually, significantly, so Jacob cannot miss it. It's so that Jacob can wake up and reconsider what kind of a person he's been, and therefore what kind of a person the Lord is calling him to be. In fact, whilst this law of moral consequence is true for everyone in the universe, we all will reap what we sow. For Jacob and for anyone who belongs to God, what we're going to see is that God now uses this principle, not mainly actually for retribution, for strict justice and punishment, but the Lord's going to use it, as this heading says, for fatherly discipline in Jacob. God is going to use even this comeuppance, this just desserts, actually for Jacob's good in his life. And although this is going to mark the beginning of a dark chapter for Jacob, as we go on in this story, we're going to see how the Lord is actually using it wonderfully for his good, both for Jacob directly and actually for God's purposes in his world more generally. God is an absolute specialist at doing this. He loves bringing good out of bad. We're just counting down, aren't we, to Good Friday, which is the best example of this. The worst possible evil, the death, the murder of the Son of God, and yet the best possible good that God could bring out of it, the salvation of the world. God knows what he's doing. He's a dab hand at doing this. Later, God says that Israel's time in Egypt was like being in an iron furnace, a place where they might get refined and purified. And what we're seeing here in Genesis, this is the preview of Israel's time. The same thing is happening to Jacob. He's foreshadowing Israel's later time of affliction and the refinement that is going to happen through that trial. And it's through this dark time in Jacob's life that the Lord is humbling him and refining his character. When he arrived in Haran, what was his name? It was Jacob, which is the one who grasps at the heel or the one who cheats. When he returns back to the promised land, and we'll get to that point in a few weeks, he will be renamed as Israel, the one who strives with God and prevails. He's going to become a new human being. And God brings wonderful blessing out of the time of hardship. Just as Israel left Egypt with great wealth, we're going to get to that in Exodus. So Jacob is going to return to the land with great possessions, despite Laban's best intentions. And although Leah was not the wife that Jacob chose, we discover that Leah is the wife that the Lord chooses. And she's not just going to bring forth 6 out of the 12 tribes of Israel, but most significantly, she's going to be the one chosen to be the ancestor of the Messiah. She's the great-great-grandmother of the Lord Jesus, the one through whom salvation is going to come to the whole world. So this time of hardship in Jacob's life, even though in one sense, yes, he's reaping what he sows, and he is, God is with him. And because God is with him, because God is for him, it is now part of God's purposes to bless Jacob, to build him up in his maturity and his growth in godliness, and ultimately to bless the world. Now, a theme verse which we began with, talks about this principle, and we saw it already. Proverbs chapter 3, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof, for the Lord reproves him whom he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights." The great danger for us when the Lord takes us through very hard times is, what do? Well, we kick against it. Why? Why is this happening to me? Obviously, God doesn't love me. Otherwise, why I'd be having the hashtag blessed life. What's going on? And the verse tells us that exactly the opposite is true. It's because the Lord loves you. It's because he delights in you that he's going to discipline you. I guess we know this, don't we? We see fathers that just disengage with their children. They see, the child's bad behavior and they just shrug. Not my problem, who cares? But we've also seen, haven't we, what a loving father does. And he loves his child too much to let them head off in that bad direction. And so what does he do? He corrects them. He disciplines them. And all discipline is painful. In Hebrews 12, the writer quotes this verse from Proverbs, and then he adds this at the end of it. "For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant. But later, it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it." You see, unless it's painful, it's not actually discipline. This is useful for young parents to learn. If it's not hurting, it's not discipline. That's how discipline works. But it's a positive kind of pain because it has an ultimate end to it. It leads to the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Our Father loves us too much to leave us as we are. He doesn't want to leave us in our immaturity. He doesn't want to leave us in our sin. And in fact, our Father has hugely high ambitions for each of us. Actually, he wants us to be like his Son, the Lord Jesus. Can you imagine? And that is our destiny. This is what our Father has for us. He's highly ambitious. But the fruit of his discipline in our lives is not going to be automatic. Do you notice that in the verse, the last phrase? It's only actually for those who are going to be trained by it. This is very important. If we are always pushing back, if we are saying, why is God attacking me? Why doesn't he love me? Then we are like that little toddler, always pushing back on the discipline, never ready to benefit from it and mature. But if we are prepared to humble ourselves and receive the discipline, have you done this? Lord, this is very painful. This is not what I would have chosen, but I know you are good. And I know you are a loving Father. And I know that you have good in this for me, even though I can't see what it is. And I will trust you. Have you done that in the hard time? Because if we are ready to do that, then this verse tells us we will come out different. We will come out trained. We'll come out like gold refined through the fire. We'll come out with the peaceful fruit of righteousness in our lives. We'll be more like our older brother, the Lord Jesus. That's what our Father is doing through it. We began with that question, didn't we? What difference does it make to have the Lord with us? And I hope you've seen in this chapter that it's not quite what we would have guessed. So the Lord does guide our path, but it's not always going to be straightforward. It may very well be into hardship. The Good Shepherd does lead us, but very often he leads us through some pretty dark valleys. And secondly, we've been seeing, haven't we? You may still reap what we sow, but for those who belong to God, it's now God's fatherly discipline in our lives. Our actions do have real consequences, but we don't have to fear that the hard times in our lives are signs that the Lord is now angry with us or against us. In fact, we discover it's quite the opposite. It's because he loves us. It's because he's committed to working even the tough times into our lives for our good that he's doing it. And therefore we can trust him. Right in the middle of the trouble, we can trust him. We can receive it as discipline, as part of his fatherly care, even when it's very, very painful. Can I say, this is much easier to say than to do. This is not at all easy, and many of us will know that from experience. There are real temptations in hard times, especially, and I know this, the temptation to self-pity. There's the temptation to blame God. Maybe you know these temptations right now. Maybe it's an ongoing battle for you in your life. You know what I'm talking about. There's a hymn written by a guy called William Cooper. He was a friend of John Newton's, the Amazing Grace guy. And William Cooper experienced terrible suffering right throughout his life. His mother died in childbirth. He was bullied throughout his time at school. He did fall in love at one point, but his father forbade the marriage, and then he remained single for the rest of his life. And the result of all this in his upbringing was that he was left with a stubborn and severe depression, and it did persist on and off for the whole of his life. He actually had numerous attempted suicides, many of them even after he was a believer. And he wrote the words that we're about to read, and actually that we're about to sing in our final hymn. And he wrote these words actually for himself, but also to try and help others to trust God's fatherly discipline in the midst of the hard times. That was the battle throughout his life. And he wrote these words to help him and us. And these words have been a great help to many. Let me read them. He says this, "Ye fearful saints," he's addressing us, "ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds ye so much dread, what are you fearful of? These clouds are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust him for his grace. Behind a frowning providence, it looks sober and frowning, but behind it, he hides a smiling face. He has good purposes for us." I'm going to leave us with these words. We're going to have a time of quiet, as we always do. And can I suggest it's a great opportunity for each of us to come before the Lord. And perhaps for a few of us, it will be a time to repent. You know, we've given in to self-pity. We've given in to blaming. For others of us, it might be a chance to ask for help from the Lord. Please help me trust you. Please help me to know your fatherly care. And for all of us, can we learn to trust that behind a frowning providence, there is a smiling face? Why don't we have a bit of quiet, and then we'll have our prayers in a moment.